Thank you so much for coming through. We will be talking about Africa's path in a world of Western aid and sanctions. As Africa, we are in a place where we rely on quote, quote, handouts. And then I think because for the longest time, we have been made to believe that we cannot survive without the handouts. We're at a place where, even as Africans, we don't have the confidence to say that maybe the Western world needs us here. We are not doing that. We are not saying that. We are telling ourselves, nope. When sanctions come, when a Western country threatens us, we say, now we are finished. So today we want to discuss that situation. Are we really finished? But also, if we are finished as a continent that is so rich with resources, talent, ideas, if we are finished, if we are doomed, if we are done, who is to blame for that? Is it our leaders? Oh, I personally would say it's our leaders. In fact, I've had a problem with the people that have led this continent since independence. That more than 60 years, we are saying, oh, the white man colonized us, they took all our belongings, we are stranded. We cannot be stranded when we are the continent with a lot of mineral resources, the continent with extravagant politicians, the continent where some of the richest people are actually in politics. So we elect these people, we put them in those places, but who do they serve? That will be the conversation that we're having today. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jackie. I will be co-hosting the space with my friend Chris. He should be joining us soon. I'm going to switch off the microphone for a few minutes just to allow other people join the conversation, and then we will kick it off. Congratulations, Chris. You're the president of Diaspora Rwanda France chapter.
Yes. We had our elections yesterday at what we call General Assembly. And we had our elections. And yes, I'm the president-elect.
Hello, Mr. President.
President-elect.
Congratulations, Chris. I wish you all the best. I wish you well. You're coming in at a very sensitive time. May your work be easier.
That's exactly why I decided to take the responsibility.
Yes.
Very challenging period for Rwanda and Rwandan communities all over the world.
Yes.
The pressure is so huge over here. So the new group, the new team, we are. I posted about it on the.
Yes, I saw the post. You're committed to it, and I wish you all the best.
So basically, yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I hope. I hope I can count on you all. This about giving our truth and sharing, and this is so personal. Like just as I keep. you know the story. We are facing explanations at our offices, supermarket, in our homes.
Yeah.
So the community. We really need to face this head on. That's being Rwanda. We have to face it.
You will make it, Chris. You will.
From the truth. So,
exactly.
Yeah, let's go back to our conversation. Actually, this sanctions.
You have our support.
This subject is part of it.
Exactly, this subject is part of it. So you're starting work officially. You're starting work officially with the space.
Yeah. But as I keep saying, and the song from Utera Knowles, if Rwanda calls, you have to say Karame.
Oh yes, you say Karame. Yes, sir, I am here.
So this was the community thought I'm the right person to take on at this particular time. So I trust them for trusting me.
Yes.
we're going to do the job.
Wonderful. Thank you. Tekeza, Charity, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Mwene. Thank you, Abuajo. I had said we will go off for a few minutes. Natalia, David, good to see you. Hilary, glad to see you. Hilary Katuma, thank you so much for joining us. And lots of other friends that have made it to the call. Thank you. I thought we were going to take a break, listen to some music as we allow other people to join the conversation. But looks like Chris and I decided to utilize that time well and talk about the calling. As Chris has said, when the call comes, you say karame. A friend Chris will be co-hosting the conversation with me. He's newly elected president of Diaspora Rwanda French chapter. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining this conversation. My name is Jackie Lumbasi. I will be hosting the space together with Chris Rezaho. We are talking about Africa's path in a world of Western aid and sanctions. And I believe that this conversation is timely. We've recently witnessed increasing pressure on Rwanda, and not just Rwanda, African countries, but we're choosing to use Rwanda as a case in point because we have seen it. It's been 2 weeks or so of stress back and forth. You have Belgium issuing threats, and then just as they were about to impose sanctions, Rwanda decided to discontinue the development agreement that had been signed for 2024 to 2029. And then when we are in that place, the UK is threatening. Then they came up with sanctions. The UK indicated that they will cease high-level attendance at events that are being hosted by the government of Rwanda. They decided they will pause financial aid to all, but they singled out the poorest and most vulnerable people in Rwanda. So financing to people that are poor and most vulnerable, that will not be discontinued. They said they will limit trade promotion activities, and then export licenses for the Rwanda Defense Force are under review as well, and training for its soldiers. Then you have had the EU also say things. So this is Rwanda at the moment. A few weeks before that, or was it just days, General Kabarebe was also sanctioned. And all this because of the alleged role of Rwanda in the DRC, alleged because the Western world has what is their view of what is going on. And they have insisted on Rwanda backing M23 rebels. As a result, in their opinion, they are making Rwanda pay for it. When I look at Rwanda's situation, when I look at General Kabarebe and other nations and individuals that have been sanctioned, Zimbabwe, Libya, you look at those situations, scenarios, and you realize this is not isolated. Rwanda is not isolated. There's a message that is being sent across. There's a pattern. And this pattern clearly shows that if you're going to continue receiving aid as Africa, then you will receive the aid, but it will be on our terms. You know, there's a saying in Kiswahili, I think even in English, is the beggar has no choice. So you will receive aid on our terms. And so we ask, is this about human rights and governance, or is it about power and influence? Let's assume it's about power and influence. The Western world wants to show who is powerful. Okay, as Africa, what are we doing? How does Africa respond to the pressures? Africa is a continent of 54 countries. We have 54 leaders. What are these leaders doing to save Africa? What are they doing to break this bondage of aid, sanctions, threats, asset freezes? What are those leaders doing? Tonight we're going to have that conversation. I have Chris as my co-host. We had invited Gatete, but unfortunately something came up, and so Gatete will not be joining the conversation. But on this space, I see we have eminent personalities, lots of people that I know as opinionated. Charity, Prince, I see Abuajo, Rugaba, you are all amazing people. I see your comments, and I will welcome you on board to share with us your thoughts on the topic. Oh, I can see Gatete has come just when I'm talking about him. Glad to have Gatete join us. So we're going to have Gatete on board. He is a Rwandan lawyer and political analyst. We're hoping to be joined by Shea Babatunde. Shea is a Nigerian entrepreneur with business investment in West and East Africa. And we will welcome you. After we've listened to our guests, we will welcome you. We will request you to put up your hand. We will give you the microphone so that you can give your opinion. Ultimately, what we hope to achieve with this conversation is deeply critique ourselves and talk about our continent and our leaders and try to send a message to the leaders because they're the people with the responsibility to change this trend. Thank you so much, all of you. Welcome on board. Chris, I would love to hear how you're doing, what space you're at, and what you're thinking about the conversation before we can hear from our first speaker, Gatete. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you once again, Jackie. Just for your information, I'm not a co-host. If you can click the button to do that, so I can help you in the job.
Okay, I'll do that, Chris. Thank you for that.
So I would rather let our guests Gatete, go on and tell us.
Okay.
To allow take the neutral part. Maybe later on I'll give my view, but on a personal level, just like this conversation, we're talking about Rwanda, but I was very surprised and confused. For the last few years, since the war in Ukraine has started, I used to think to hear about aid to Ukraine. Now I'm hearing about Ukraine paying for aid. I'm like, was it a loan? Maybe Gatete will help me understand that, because this is making me confused, to be very honest. And as for us Africans, I mean, for Rwandans in particular, this is a remake. We've seen that, we've been there. So it's, and even the president has warned us when he came here in France in 2011 about someone giving you a shirt and then telling you how to wear it if it's not iron, and reminding you that you need to clean it up, or to I posted that video. But this is very confusing time for me, and I don't believe aid is there for democracy or good governance, as it said. Anyway, I'll let Gatete explain since he's here. Thank you very much, Gatete, for making it finally. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. Gatete, thank you so much. For those who are not inducted, Gatete is a Rwandan lawyer. He's a political analyst, and it's such an honor for us to have him on the space tonight. Gatete, our topic of discussion, Africa's path in a world of Western aid and sanctions. You, as a keen observer, you have seen what has happened in the last 2 weeks, and we're saying this could be targeting Rwanda, but clearly a message is just being sent through what Rwanda is currently going through. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on this. How did you process what has been going on over the last 2 weeks? If there are any lessons that you think the rest of Africa can draw from Rwanda's experience, please share with us. And as you give us the opening remarks, also talk about the responsibility of our leaders. We've got a few questions that we will ask you, but for now, as you're opening on, please let's hear how you processed the last 2 weeks and take it on from there, Gatete. Good to have you on.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. So I'll try to be as concise as I can, because I know this is a vast question, but there's a few things that I think are important to establish. The first thing, what is aid? When we define aid, aid is a hindrance to agency for African countries. Aid is good, just like, think of aid as if you had a sugar daddy, or you had a sponsor, or somebody who gave you free money. But you see, two things happen. One, when they give you money, if you break the money down, about 10 to 20% of the money actually trickles down to you, to your country. Many of you remember buses that were called Onatracom buses to this day. These buses would be given for free by Japan to Rwanda, but then Japan would ensure that the spare parts of these buses for the entire life of said buses is procured in Japan. If you do the math, in the end you find out that you have not really been given a free bus. You've just been made dependent. You've been made a client of the person who offered you the bus. That's a simple example I'll give you. In her book, Dead Aid, Dambisa Moyo speaks of a village. And she says in this village, there were women who are weaving mosquito nets. And then when they were weaving mosquito nets, they were selling them at maybe at an affordable price, but they were not giving them for free. Then one day, USAID entered that village, and when it did, it offered free mosquito nets. And then when they did, 5 years, so this drove the women who are weaving this out of business. And so 2 years later, the mosquito nets were worn out, but the women had moved to a different business. They'd moved to farming and so on. There was no longer this small enterprise that was weaving mosquito nets. But the USAID project had closed. So the village, people in the village started catching malaria, and malaria devastated the village. So not only did the aid kill the business, it also exposed the population of that village to malaria, because the mosquito nets that were affordable but available had disappeared in the village because of the aid that was given. That's how her book Dead Aid starts, and it's quite revealing example. Aid in Rwanda has been very useful, but with it has come several things that were actually pernicious. One of them being, you all know here, that Rwanda is referred by just about every media in the West that writes about Rwanda. They call it darling of the West. But why do they do so? By calling it darling of the West, they're trying to negate Rwandans' effort and urgency by saying what all you see in Rwanda is achieved because of the charity of foreigners. We don't exist. We stay here. All we do, we as Rwandans, we beg money and we steal minerals from Congo. There's nothing in Rwanda that is our doing. All is drawn from charity and from scrounging foreign people's minerals. Why is that said? Because Africans, and you'll see in the elections, it didn't happen in these elections this time, but in the elections in 2017, there was an article that ran through all the media that said, African leaders think Kagame's Rwanda is an example and we think they're wrong. The same article was run through The Economist, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, everybody, every Western media wrote that. It is very important that African countries do not see Rwanda as an example, because they should see us, who give them the money to achieve what they do, as the example, because otherwise they would ask not to be given aid. Now, recently USAID published a list of countries that it was suspending aid in the world. Rwanda did not figure in the list because USAID, first of all, doesn't give direct funding to budget funding to a country. Even the money that they give to the NGOs, they give to American NGOs, so that most of it stays in the US, or the little that is given in the countries where they work is given to products, to buy products that are of American made. But you can see there's no simple, by any calculations that you make, Rwanda is one of the least beneficiaries of aid. Any calculations that you make. Most of the Rwandan money comes from loans, and most of it comes from taxpayers, tax from Rwandans, then loans. loans. Every country in the world takes loans. But the little aid that we get, some people try to rebase the calculations and say we have to read aid per capita. So they say if there's 11 million people, let's see how much does every individual take of that aid, so that we measure, because most countries receive so much aid, but they say, yeah, but they're also bigger populations, that kind of thing. So they try to come up with all types of calculations to arrive at a narrative that says Rwanda lives off of aid. That's number two. Number three, when Britain said that it is cutting aid to Rwanda, I checked in Rwanda. I found out that in this year, this exercise of 2024-2025, Britain has given exactly 0 francs to the Rwandan budget. I repeat, 0. So when they say that they are cutting foreign aid to Rwanda, they're just saying this to manage the Congolese public, because they met the Congolese and then the Congolese cried to them and they said, yes, we're going to do something about it. Belgium, which had, we stopped the cooperation with Belgium. Belgium was giving to Rwanda $5 million. $5 million, I have clients in Kigali who pay taxes of that amount. Just individuals. It is not significant. But in the idea, in fact, is to create two things. Is one, to dissuade investors by saying there's going to be a financial crisis in that country, therefore don't go to invest there, foreign investors. Is to create a psychosis within the Rwandan public. Some people saying, oh, we're not going to get fertilizers anymore, we're not going to get ARVs anymore. And third, it is to manage the Congolese public, which is easily duped that they have done something against Rwanda. Foreign aid in Rwanda represents, people will tell you, direct budget support. If the Rwandan budget is about $3 billion, aid does not represent 10% of that, foreign aid. Now, what does that mean is that, like I said before, if I have seen young people with no jobs who have iPhone 16, several young people with no jobs who have iPhone 16, why don't they have the Chinese Techno? It's because somebody bought them iPhone 16. However, if they did not have that somebody, they would have telephones, they would communicate, but they would communicate within their means. The fact that we are used to this idea and this language of we'll cut your aid, it means that we have prepared ourselves, just like we have, as many of you saw, that we have anti-missile protection defense mechanisms. We do not think in one way only. It's a holistic thinking process. When we say we established a fund that we call Dagachiro, and we put money in that fund, it's about capitalized at about $1 billion Rwandan francs right now, which is more. That's the capitalization of Agachiro fund, which is more than any aid that Rwanda receives today. So we have a fund that is called Agachiro, and Agachiro in Kinyarwanda means dignity. The fund is capitalized at $1 billion today, as we speak, which is far, far, far more than foreign aid to Rwanda. So which means, even though we have not encountered a situation where we need to tap into the fund, but which means we have reserves, we have a similar anti-defense mechanisms against this attack, because this is also an attack. Aid is not something that we beg. I've seen people cry out and beg for aid. Aid, we see aid as partnership. When people say that the European Union gives $20 million a year to our army, I went to Mozambique, to Cabo Delgado. There is a plane that is at the disposal of the troops, because it's a big area that flies in all directions every day. We spend more than the money that we are spending, that we are receiving from the European. And the president alluded to it when he said, when we said we start this operation, many people said they will support us, and once we started, we never heard from them again. So we spend more money in our peacekeeping operations than we receive. We tap into our own reserves to support fellow Africans. Now, a country that does that It's not a country that is at the mercy, that is at the disposal of anyone who would like to launch an attack, financial attack in this case, like that one. There was a Belgian team that refused to come to visit to the cycling, but you could see that the person who won the first lap of the race was a Belgian. Some teams came. So we will receive all sorts of attacks since they've launched bombs and we have defense mechanisms. They've launched drones, we have defense mechanisms. Now they will use this financial approach, but it will be foolhardy of them to think that we did not prepare for this as well. So the aid in Rwanda is extremely insignificant. It is useful. Just like me here, if you give me 5,000 francs, I wouldn't refuse it. But in fact, if you take it away, it wouldn't affect my life. And this is the most important aspect. One more thing. When you revert to threatening to cut aid, that means you've run out of arguments. The minister of the foreign minister of Britain came to Rwanda and then went to the DRC and then made a declaration and said, although Rwanda has security needs, they must not revert to a military solution. As though when the DRC was launching bombs on Rwandan territory only last month, we should have sat down and pray or perhaps call Kinshasa to ask for forgiveness. I don't know what measures they do. Now, in the same week that the foreign minister made those remarks, his prime minister cut aid globally to increase defense spending. So that level of double standard is only possible if your country is vulnerable to this aid, if you are too dependent on aid. Now, aid is something that we are not dependent on because we know we cannot survive. Because you are very vulnerable the moment you subject yourself to foreign aid too much. And in fact, it is not they who cut aid. It is us who've been reducing it year in, year out. The government has been, the services that the aid was offering, the government of Rwanda increasingly goes and takes over and so on, because they are, for us to be fully secure, we are militarily fully secure, we are food secure, we are security secure, we are justice secure, we are governance secure. But for us to be fully secure, we have to wean ourselves off of the aid completely. There is a sign in Singapore that says no aid allowed here. In the next 5 to 10 years, I will be the one going to picket that sign in the roundabout, right? Written, no aid is accepted here. And the moment you do that, in fact, the moment you do that, you have taken the stick from the person who's beating you with it, and you've thrown it away. Because then, if a person resorts to the reason Tshisekedi doesn't negotiate with M23 is because they believe, the reason we have Congolese Tutsi in refugee camps here for 30 years is because the Congolese believe that, unlike them, that we are dependent on aid. And we are dependent on minerals. We are not dependent on either. We have minerals, but if you hear the speeches, every speech of a Congolese politician or a Congolese commentator, he cannot finish his sentence without talking about minerals. Oh, they're stealing our minerals, or our minerals this, our minerals that. And in fact, they have lost, this is something that I was going to write about. They have even lost their capacity. When I saw that we discovered the oil wells in the Kivu, I was a bit worried, and which is why I wanted to write this story for young people to understand that we should never become like the Emiratis, we should never become like the Congolese. We should always have our capacity to convince, our capacity to litigate, our capacity to advocate, our capacity to explain. We should not be the people who go on a negotiation and tell the person in front of us, name your price, as though everything is to be bought. So the message I have for young people here is that the hubris that the West has of telling us you must do our bidding or we'll cut your aid. I wish that the day very soon, when Rwanda becomes a rich country, we must never lose our capacity to convince, our capacity to advocate and litigate, and our empathy towards the other person. Because the fact that people speak to you, Charity, it's the Bible, I think, that says that if you give with the right hand, you must your left hand must not know. But imagine countries when they give aid, they do it spectacularly. In fact, they inscript on cars, gift of the people of America, gift of the people of the Britain, gift of the people of so and so. They do it becomes ultimately self-serving. It is as though you go and see a beggar on the street and you take a selfie giving them money. While you give them money, you take a selfie. In fact, you are poorer at heart than the person you're giving the charity. So it is very important for me to clarify, aid in Rwanda is insignificant. It is, like I said, it's like if you came to my house right now and give me 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, I will say thank you. But if you say, let's take a selfie together, I'll tell you, please go with your money. I'm not interested. Aid has not, obviously, the Rwandan franc has remained stable. I did a small analysis when I was congratulating Ambassador Gwangomga. I was looking, Rwanda's inflation has been going down consistently every year, and it has this year as well. So aid is more a media hype than it is, in fact, concretely impacting our budget. However, there are several NGOs here in Kigali and across the country that receive Western money. Two things I have to say about them. One is that I have not seen an NGO build a bridge, build a hospital, build a factory. They do sensitization and capacity building. They have a saying in South Sudan. When you tell them, let's give you capacity building, they say, please give us the building, keep the capacity to yourself. So that is going to be affected. The mobilization, the training, the capacity building, the sensitization, the research. I'll end this first presentation with a saying that says, if only people could give half the, if the poor can be given half the money spent on studying them, they wouldn't be poor anymore. So that would be my submission now. But if you have questions, feel free to shoot. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Gatete. There's a lot to take from that submission. You've broken it down so well. When you are talking about the aid that makes you a client, you use the sponsor, and I remembered somebody saying there's no free lunch. If somebody invites you for free lunch, you're going to enjoy free lunch today, but be sure that you'll be paying for it tomorrow, if not the day after. So thank you for, using that example. You've pointed out that it makes you a client of the person that gives it to you. That's very clear. Belgium was giving us $5 million. Yeah, not very significant. And then less than 10% of the budget supported by foreign aid. This I'm just repeating for the sake of those that probably joined the conversation after Gatete had made the submission. And aid is not something that Rwanda begs. You look at it as partnership. I think that, Gatete, is such a key point, because when the news was released that, Rwanda had discontinued the development partnership, the agreement that had been signed with Belgium for 2024-2029. I remember somebody saying in Luganda, they say, Omugaga tumunyigira. You don't nyiga for Omugaga. A beggar has no choice. And all these things that were said. So this mainly came from Africans. We've been put in a position where as Africans, you see yourselves as incapable, and you're saying, no, we don't have the capacity to say no to aid. We don't have the capacity to get upset when we're offended by the master. Thank you for saying that in Rwanda's case, indeed, there's aid because Rwanda has benefited from donor funding. But without it, the country still survives. We have Agachero. You pointed out, you mentioned Cabo Delgado. I had planned to mention, to ask you a question related to that, because I know that you've visited that place before. Gatete, I wanted to know, why would Rwanda, a small country with limited resources, be deeply concerned about matters of security, especially in the region? There's you protecting your borders against the close neighbors like the DRC. Why would you move to CAR? Why would Rwanda be interested in going to Mozambique with very little resources that we had? We have countries promised to come on board and support the cause, but they did not. And so definitely Rwanda ended up using more than they had anticipated. In whose interest is that? Why would Rwanda be interested in supporting or taking part in regional security matters?
So it's very important. So Rwanda is the custodian of two very important principles following the genocide against the Tutsi. The two principles, one is called responsibility to protect, and the second one is it's called the Kigali principle. So there are two principles, the Kigali principles, both of them before, at the independence of Africa, of the continent, and that in fact at the creation of the United Nations. When you read, this gives me an opportunity to explain something. When you read every communique from every institution, they will tell you territorial integrity and intangibility of borders, is inviolable by the UN Charter. That is correct. But that is the 1948 doctrine. After that doctrine, we saw that governments turned against their own citizens and killed them. So that principle was founded to say that what is happening in internal matters of a country, the rest of the world must keep away. That principle was entrenched in the UN Charter of 1948. However, throughout the years, we've seen several countries where governments in power turned against its own citizens. And in fact, the culmination of that is the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994. But before that, we had a situation in Yugoslavia. We had the Armenian genocide. We had the Sudanese being oppressed in Sudan. We had situations in Libya. In fact, even the Western people have, although they did it on false pretenses, they said that Gaddafi was using his air force to bomb his own people, and that was unacceptable. And the coalition was put in place, ostensibly to create a no-flight zone on Libya, and eventually they, in fact, wanted to remove and kill Gaddafi. So the principle of inviolability of borders and intangibility of borders and territorial integrity is obsolete in international law. And Rwanda is the custodian of the new principle that is called responsibility to protect. Responsibility to protect means the world must not watch, as they did in Rwanda, the world must not watch as a government is turning against its own population. So the second principle is called the Kigali principles on the protection of civilians, which means a government cannot turn against civilians in its own country and kill them or oppress them. These are the new values of international law, and the custodian of those values were created especially following the genocide, 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, because the government that was in power, the Habyarimana regime, had turned against its own population. Now, when you see a communique from the United States, from the United Kingdom, from France, from the UN, etc., saying that the borders of Congo are inviolable, they're trying to negate these critical principles that were championed by Rwanda that says we cannot sit and see. So there are two principles I told you. Responsibility to protect is when you go and forcefully confront a government that is turning against its own citizens. It's an important principle, because if a government is oppressing its own citizens, Rwanda, based on the responsibility to protect principle, must not sit down here and see the Congolese government oppress the Tutsi Congolese. Rwanda has every right in international law, and I can demonstrate it, to go and protect that community. Not only the Tutsi Congolese, any other tribe Congolese, Rwanda has the responsibility. The entire world does have that responsibility. But because Rwanda is the custodian and the champion of this responsibility to protect principle, other countries would like to prevent this responsibility to protect and only use it when it suits them. So for instance, they use this in Libya, they use this in former Yugoslavia, they used it They use it. They said Saddam Hussein had weapons. Not only did he have weapons of mass destruction, false again, but he was also oppressing his own population, and so on and so forth. So they use this principle only when it suits them. But Rwanda uses it legitimately, which is why the government, but that was the responsibility to protect. The second principle, which is critical, which is based upon which Rwanda deploys, is that the Kigali principles, they're called Kigali principles. They're called Kigali principles for a reason, to protect civilians. So if the government, this is the second principle, now if the government of a country has failed to protect its own citizens, it doesn't oppress them, but it only just failed to protect them, like in the case of Mozambique. The Mozambican government has not individually succeeded in fully protecting its own population. There is a militia group that is in Mozambique that is oppressing the Mozambican people. Rwanda is called upon as a champion of the Kigali principles on the protection of civilians to go to Cabo Delgado and pacify that area in partnership with the Mozambican government. It's upon this principle, which is the Kigali principle, that all these countries that all these UN missions normally would be founded upon. Unfortunately, in Congo, it's the Kigali principle stand upside down, where countries come together, coalesce together with the government to oppress its own citizens. It's uncanny. It's a violation. It's taking these two principles and making the head working on their head, turn them upside down. So the government of Rwanda, for example, went to Mozambique, went to Central African Republic to foster the Kigali principles on the protection of civilians. Now, people will tell you that Rwanda is in Mozambique because it is securing Total Energy wells. But what's wrong with Total Energy wells? What's wrong with securing them? The question is, did the civilians return home? Did refugees go home? Did schools reopen? Did the markets reopen? The world failed Mozambique. Total Energy, and by the way, Total is not even the biggest investor, but that's another story. The world failed Mozambique. Total investment was there. South Africans deployed there. SADC deployed there. The mercenaries were deployed there. They all failed Mozambique. Rwanda went there, and schools have reopened. Markets have reopened. Churches have reopened. But nobody reports that. Displaced people have returned to their homes. People are farming in their farms. Nobody reports that. All everybody reports is that part of what Rwanda is doing there is providing security for an investment. How can you secure a place and not secure investment? The biggest promoter of this is South African media, which was displaced when Rwandan troops came because they had failed to secure the area. They had run away, and when Rwanda came, Rwanda secured the place. They feel bitter about it. In fact, one of the reasons South Africa deploys in the DRC, other than the fact that Ramaphosa, Zuma, and so on have personal mineral concessions, is the fact that they understand that they have been displaced as the rainmaker of the Southern African region. We did not go there for hegemonic reasons. We went there because we were invited to foster the Kigali principles on the protection of civilians. So I wanted to emphasize on those two principles. They're not written about so much, or not fostered so much, because Rwanda is their champion. But in fact, those are the principles that have replaced, because in the UN Charter, there are two contradictory provisions. One says sovereignty of territory, of intangibility of borders, and what Mzee Nyerere talks about. But there's also another provision that talks about the right of citizens to self-determination. The right of peoples to self-determination. Self-determination is not only through the force of arms. Self-determination is right to education, right to citizenship, right to protection, right to socio-economic protection, right to civil and political rights, and so on. Now, once you are denied of those rights, you are justified to revolt against your own state within the ambit of international law once again. So this is very important. I have to emphasize this again. So The current school of thought, the current thematic, which is championed by Rwanda, is the responsibility to protect when a government turns against its own citizens, and the Kigali principles on the protection of civilians. I hope I've answered your question.
You've answered the question. You've answered it very well. And there's something I want you to respond to as well. So Rwanda is the custodian of those two principles, the responsibility to protect and Kigali principles. There's a question that has persisted. People ask, why Rwanda? Why is it that Rwanda, which is in the middle of these countries, will have an issue with almost all its neighbors? Gatete, I want to hear from you. Is it that Rwanda is so powerful that it scares people? Is it the model of governance, Rwanda's model of governance? Is it posing a threat to the neighbors and no neighbors? Because this will be something that will be said even by people that are far off. The concern that why Rwanda, why is it right in the middle and fighting with all its neighbors? Do you have a response to that, Gatete?
I do have a response to that. I'll quote you a musician from Côte d'Ivoire called Tiken Jaffa Koli. He says, "Tout le monde veut le paradis, mais personne ne veut payer le prix." Everybody wants paradise, but no one wants to pay the price for paradise. Every Nigerian president campaigns on ending corruption in Nigeria. Every Nigerian president also gets a stroke 2 months into his presidency. Consistently. Why? Because it is so difficult to dispossess others of their influence and of their interests. We have a fundamental ideological struggle with our neighbors first, but most importantly, with the people who have appointed themselves masters of principles and of morals, moral teachers, moral this and moral that. Rwanda, President Kagame and the RPF have decided that they will not accept corruption, that they will not accept nepotism, that they will not accept several other things, that they will apply principles by the book and they will hold people accountable. Typically, leaders, powerful people, famous people do not get held accountable. In Rwanda, you do get held accountable. But this is seen by, so for example, like I said in the first submission, that some people would like to claim Rwanda's agency and steal it from Rwandans themselves. But you see, when you dispossess those people of that legitimacy to claim agency on your behalf, those people turn to become your enemies. When the Banyamulenge were killed in Gatumba, in Burundi, we were in this conflict with the DRC. Alison Deforge, a woman who had been very useful, helpful, friendly to us, who was seeing that her influence in Rwanda was dwindling because when the government took over the RPF, she wanted to be the one to decide who comes for genocide conferences, who gets awarded this, who gets awarded that. And Rwandans told her, listen, thank you for your support, but this is our lives, let's lead our lives. You can keep helping, but you must not sit in our seat. When the Banyamulenge were killed in Gatumba, she said, and that's when our relationship was completely damaged in university. She said, we must not report the truth. The truth was, these people were killed by Congolese government, FDLR, and FLN, which was another genocide ideology party in Burundi. Said, we must not report what happened because this would embolden Rwanda. Thousands of innocent people have been massacred, but she said if we did this, it's as though today FDLR, so for example, today I have colleagues telling me that the FDLR generals in MONUSCO being hidden in MONUSCO camps, but MONUSCO has refused to surrender them because that would prove what Rwanda has been saying. It would prove Rwanda's point. Now, there's the fact that if Rwanda has an ideological stand, now, if you have to stand by your principles, that has its own price to pay. Now you must choose. Some countries, leaders use clientelism. You see Paul Biya going to living in Switzerland and not being in Cameroon and nobody bothers him. It's because every strong family in Cameroon is taken care of and they have divided themselves power and influence and they forget about the rest of the population. So some countries, I'm using Paul Biya because he's the farthest. Tshisekedi does the same thing. All the foreigners that you see suddenly are in a mood with Kinshasa who are criticizing Rwanda daily, they're all being paid every day to speak like that. Now, those people, those leaders, if you may call them leaders, they use clientelism to maintain their power. In Rwanda, we don't. We do legitimacy and the rule of law. Now, foreigners, again, and this is very dangerous, whenever you will see all of you are on social media, you'll see that whenever Rwanda does something, so for instance, if Rwanda says, we are hosting Formula 1, you see three comments from Africans. You see the majority of Africans saying, congratulations, we'll come down there when the Formula 1 event takes place. That's the majority. Then you'll see 10% of them saying, you are lying, you cannot afford it, you are a poor country, or you are wasting your money, or why does a poor country like you, which lives off of aid, want to organize something like that? And you have another 10% that turns to their own leaders and tells them, you are good for nothing. Why haven't you done what Rwanda has done? Do you understand that's how I've divided you, the 100% of the Africans? Now, it's very important. Those leaders see it as a threat. I'll give you a concrete example. Rwanda does not have what they call in airline language, fifth freedom. That means it does not have the right to go to Kampala, to Nairobi, to Dar es Salaam, and to Kinshasa, to pick passengers from there as their first destination and to take them somewhere else. These countries have denied Rwanda that right. They've allowed Emirates, Qatar, a British airline, KLM to do that, but they have denied this right to Rwanda. Why? Because they believe that if Rwandan Air establishes a base in their country, our nearest base is in Guinea, Conakry. That's the nearest Rwandan airline base. Another one is in Abuja, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Because those are countries that far off from us, that they do not see us as our pursuit, our conduct, as a political threat, an ideological threat to their own government. So these presidents in the region, they see it as not as enemies. We are not enemies, but they see that they are not happy when their citizens tell them, when you post that Kigali is clean, there will always be a Kenyan who says, but you Nairobi, why you not clean? Or you Bujumbura and so on. That's not the purpose. We say this place is clean because we want to invite people to visit. We don't say this place is clean so because we want to show it as an indictment to places that are not clean. That's not the purpose. But of course, everyone understands and turns it in. Some people use Rwanda as a stick to beat their own government and so forth. So this is one of the reasons that Rwanda has had problems with its neighbors. Second reason, like I keep saying, there are 40 million Rwandans in this region. 40 million. Thereabouts. Last time I did this study was a while ago. So, rule of thumb, there are 40 million. Only 14 of them are Rwandan citizens, and only 14 million live in Rwanda. The rest are citizens of those respective countries. And throughout history, every country, Uganda under Obote, DRC now for the last 30 years, Tanzania at some point as well, at a given moment in those countries, these Rwandans have been told, go home to Rwanda. At a given time in history. When it happened to the Rwandans in Tanzania, it was under Habyarimana. Habyarimana was all too happy to support that, but Mzee Nyerere stopped it. So every time this community feels threatened, they have relatives. People think it's the government of Rwanda that's supporting M23. It is me, and it is you, and it is him, and it is her. It is individuals, because I have cousins in M23. If my cousin in Ruchuru or Masisi calls me and says, could you please buy me boots because I am fighting without shoes, what do you think I'm going to do? If he's really my cousin, And he has cousins in Rwanda. He also has cousins in Uganda. The government of Rwanda need not support M23 because M23 has relatives. 40 million of relatives in this region. That is what people oppressing Rwandans in these countries don't understand. Rwanda is a nation. Now there's nationality and nation. A nation is a people, a language, and a culture. There are people who share that, and there are 40 million people. You cannot defeat them. 40 million people who share a language, a culture, and the history and the nationality. You cannot defeat them. Now, it so happened, like Mwalimu keeps saying, that the Rwandan kingdom was partitioned. The ambitions of the Rwandan government of today is not to expand its territory. It already struggled to manage the little one that we have here. The ambition of this country is to pray. The prayer of this country is to ensure that every citizen in his own country is at peace. If you oppress one of the 40 million, people keep saying that M23 are Tutsi-led, Tutsi whatever. It's not true. Only if you have not traveled to see M23. Oh, it is Rwandans protecting Tutsi rights, but they're Rwandans because Rwandans protect Rwandans' rights, and the Tutsi are part and parcel of the Rwandan culture, tradition, lineage, and so on. And Tutsi and Hutu are one people. Therefore, if you oppress one of them, you oppress all of them. So this is something that people need to understand. If you attack the people Banyambo in Karagwe here in Tanzania, we are all going to turn against you. If you attack the Fumbira, my uncles in Kisoro and Masaka, we are all going to turn against you. If you attack the Banyabulenge in Uvira, we are all going to turn against you. This is something that people need to get to grasp. But also, you don't have to attack them because they don't attack you. They live, all they yearn for is to live freely and happily in their own natural habitat. When I used to go to Masisi when I was a kid, 5-year-old, there was no miners there. People were herding cattle on top of those mines that people hear about, herding cows and farming beans and potatoes. So these people want to practice their livelihood, which is to raise cattle and produce milk and cheese and butter and beef and hide and skin, and that's what they want to do. They don't want to rule. They don't want to oppress anyone. But if they're oppressed, a cattle keeper or a farmer and a cattle keeper are people who are very jealous of their stability because they invest in the land a lot. They invest in the grass and they invest in their crops. They do not want anybody to tamper with their stability. They don't want to move. They've become sedentary. And it's not, people used to say Tutsi are cattle keepers, Hutus are farmers. It's not true. They both do both now. It's business. And these people are very jealous of their piece of land and they're very jealous of their time. And the only enemy they must have is season. The rain, the sun, and insects, crickets. That's the only enemy they can tolerate. Even that crickets they don't tolerate. Now, we even have a lake. There's a lake, Ugandan lake called Lake Albert. It's called Rwichanzige because we believe that no cricket could cross that lake. It has the Kinyarwanda name. That's what I'm telling you.
Basically, you're saying you're everywhere.
No, we are everywhere. But we are
everywhere.
You. But we are also you are me. We have through marriage, through partnership, through friendship, through joint historical. We are one people. We are Africans. Africans are everywhere. So anyone who thinks that Kagame needs to take money from his pocket to fund M23 is mistaken. Because I know just about 14 million people who are willing to do it. And I also know another 10 million people in Uganda who are willing to do it. And another 5 million in Tanzania who are willing to do it. And another 500 or a million in Burundi who are willing to do it. And so that conversation is moot. The best thing is to leave them alone. Thank you.
Gatete, thank you. My goodness. Let me give you some time to take a glass of water as we now move from Rwanda. That is such a passionate perspective. And for those wondering, this was meant to be about Africa's path in a world of Western aid, but we also chose to use Rwanda because of the recent developments. We chose to use Rwanda as the reference point at the moment We've had several other countries sanctioned in the past, but Rwanda's is still hot. And that is why you hear a lot of Rwanda. We now want to look at it from a continental point of view. Africa Kids, prepare your points. Brian Kimenyi, I see you and I have that message. Sylvie and Sanga, thank you so much for your comment. I'm going to read that. I've got some comments. I'm going to bring in Shay Babatunde, but just before I bring in Shay, let me read this comment from Sylvie. There are so many agreements made on aid effectiveness, making sure aid responds to local needs and that there is no conditionalities on it. On human right point of view, it is wrong to politicize aid because call to aid, there is a need. The people who need it, not the political leaders. So, on a human rights point, you cannot say you are punishing a leader by cutting aid. But in fact, aid is a controlling tool of powerful countries. And we're also forgetting something. After colonization, reparation was supposed to be made. I wonder how much of that has been made so far. We should not be talking about aid, but instead reparation. But because we had to make it sweet and remember, after independence, our elders had no power. They could not oppose much of what the white man said. Thank you for your thoughts, Sylvie. Please share those messages. We're going to read them. Shay, we would love to hear from you after you've listened to Gatete's views. We are talking about Africa being richly endowed. Let's look at Nigeria, your homeland, a country with oil wells and lots of resources. But when USAID releases the list of beneficiaries, you'll see Nigeria at the top somewhere there. We wonder how effectively that aid is used. Shay, I would love your thoughts on the idea of Africa receiving aid, the fact that aid is weaponized, and every now and then when an African nation tries to oppose a Western country, they'll be threatened, they'll be sent packing, they'll be sent into a corner, go cry there, come back apologizing. Shay, pleasure to have you here. Time to hear from you.
Oh, thank you very much. Sorry, I can be a bit late. Can everyone hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. All right, thank you very much for bringing me in. Okay, so the concept of Africa and aid-seeking narrative, it's basically not new. From the aspect of working within the this pity party that these guys, what they need is aid. You know, you just have to give them aid to develop. So the concept of aid for Africa basically it's from that mindset that we are incompetent, we cannot do stuff by ourselves. So we need a foreign partner to give us aid. Okay, and that's it. So that's where that analysis that we just have to have aid for us to prosper. We just have to ask for aid for us to to develop. Jackie, you made mention of the recent revelation by the Congress in America stating that the USAID has been sponsoring some insecurity back home in Nigeria and even across the world. You know, one of the most annoying part of this aid-seeking narrative for Africa is the fact that we often think that this aid actually is meant for development. Okay, and serves no one singular purpose: the self-interest of the colonizer, the self-interest of those superpower. Okay, and as such, the people receiving the aid, it's to the detriment of their own country. Okay, so I personally believe that aid should stop. I mean, if people like us actually we have some excitement when we see that a Republican president nominee eventually won. Okay, not necessarily because you want to love Trump, but because of the fact that Trump basically doesn't send Africa. Okay, Trump is not interested in anything; he just wants the best for his country, which is what African leaders should start thinking about. Okay, self-preservation is key to sustainability of the continent. It's about time that we start letting our leaders to know that this aid doesn't really mean anything for us. It's basically people bringing this aid. They also have self-interest. They basically want to explore some of this aid. For instance, if you check on the website of USAID before it came down, if you check each of the projects that they did in Africa, I want to take a specific example of Zambia. Why I'm taking Zambia as an example is because if you go to the Jumbotron, somebody just posted a very interesting book by Moyo Dambisa. It's called Dead Aid. Now, Dead Aid is a book I would recommend for everybody to read. The author of this book is a Zambian, and the author of this book has worked with a lot of these international NGO, international aid granting companies, institutions. Now, if you go to the website of institutions like USAID, and you check each of those projects, okay, a particular project that you will see for some of those projects, the people that are going to implement those projects, they're in Washington. They appoint consultants back home. Let's say they appoint consultants in Zambia, and they give those consultants little money to implement. But the real money doesn't necessarily leave Washington. Okay, the real development fund really doesn't leave Washington. It's there among those smaller companies that are created in Washington. They just appoint consultants in Africa, and the consultants implement some of those things. So this calls for the fact that listening, or we stop looking at aid an alternative for development. Okay, we need to start looking at trade. We need to start looking at commerce. We need to start looking at entrepreneurship. We need to start looking at going back home, going back to our various countries, and letting people understand that ourselves, those that we're thinking are going to save us, they are basically on self-interest. So we need to be selfish enough as a continent. We need to be selfish enough as a country, individual country, to creating a lot of entrepreneurs. Okay, if you Google right now, if you Google the problems of Africa, just try it right now. If you Google it, the following are likely to come out: poverty, lack of opportunity, disease, war. Okay, these are problems, right? So with problems comes opportunity. If you have a problem from the entrepreneurial viewpoint, if you have a problem, most of the problems that you have around, entrepreneurs are meant to solve it, not charity that will solve those problems. So if let's say you have a problem of lack of water in somewhere in Nakuru in Kenya, for instance, okay, so instead of bringing water aid, instead of bringing an NGO called Water Aid to solve it, why not empower somebody that could dig borehole around Nakuru, okay, and charge very, very little? At the long run, that person is solving unemployment problem, and that person is also solving the problem of hunger, lack of water. So aid is a temporal solution, but trade, which is commerce, seems to be what Africa really needs. Okay, these guys that we think we can rely on are just basically here for self-interest. Although I think Rwanda really monitors some of these NGOs better than most African countries. But I know that most African countries just give these NGOs a free way to operate, and when they operate, some of them, instead of doing what they want to do, they basically go into the interland. Okay, I can speak categorically about Nigeria. They go into the interland. They go to Borno in the northern Nigeria to distribute arms to Boko Haram. I mean, a United States Congress just affirmed what we already know. These are what some of these aid institutions do. Okay, so if we continue to rely on if we continue to rely on aid, we should expect more conflict. Okay, we should expect a prolonged conflict. However, if we continue to see ourselves as the owner of that institution, as the owner of the country, as the stakeholder in the continent, we need to start empowering entrepreneurs. We need to start empowering individuals. We need education, because nobody is going to save us. We are the only one that can save ourselves. So from the view, it's what only give us more ability to think. Nobody's of us. There's no free meal. There's no free lunch. Unfortunately, when they get those certain things in return, you see insecurity, you see things that further impoverish our continent. So it's about time we continue to, give ourselves orientation and start trading instead of looking for aid. So I would like to submit at this point, please.
I wanted to ask you a question. You mentioned mostly about aid and businesses and trade. What about the sanctions? Is it, what's your view on these sanctions, which comes, I would say, with aid?
You mean sanction?
Yes. How does Africa navigate these sanctions?
Okay, if the question navigate sanctions, in as much that the world is divided into, according to Nkrumah, we don't face the east nor the north. We want to move forward. Okay, so that is Nkrumah's line of thought, that Africa shouldn't be polarized into following the maybe pro-Russia, following America. Africa just needs to move forward. We have a lot of history that we basically don't have any choice than to just move forward. Now, the issue of sanction. Let me give a little bit of analysis of the influence of sanction on the continent and globally. Immediately, Russia-Ukraine war started. The Democratic president, I would like to be mentioning their party, not just mentioning the country. The Democratic president of America, with all the institutions, decided to sanction, Kremlin, that's sanction Russia. And the implication of those sanctions, some of the steps taken to make sure that Russia was sanctioned include freezing all their assets within Europe, freezing all their what do they call it? Oligarchs, that's their millionaires around the world, freezing some of their assets. Abramovich, specifically one of the top sports entrepreneur in the world, who actually got his asset frozen in Europe, and he have to even sell. I don't know if he eventually sold Chelsea and all that. So those are sanctions. Okay, there are some within the continent. There are countries such as Zimbabwe that have gotten sanctions for some times, and recently I know. Because of what's happening in DRC, some country, some institution from the UK and other countries tried to sanction, Rwanda. Now, the implication of sanction basically is that is limitation to opportunity. Okay, you basically have limited opportunity in trade. You basically have the limited opportunity in partnership. Okay, so will this sanction really affect Africa? Yes, definitely. I mean, if Kremlin, Russia was sanctioned, and if Russia war and Ukraine war affected Africa in terms of food prices, in terms of inability for us to get wheat for bread, and it affects, basically sanction will affect Africa too. So what can we do? What can we do to mitigate some of these sanctions? For me, I think we African leaders should start looking inward to a much more bipolar regional governance. Okay. Let me give you a typical example. We need alternative. Basically, that's one thing that we should start looking at. We need alternative. You will recall for the past 2-3 years that 2 years or thereabout that the Russia-Ukraine war has been going on. The influence and the conversation around BRICS have started, and you see a lot of conversation on the fact that there's a need to have an alternative currency to really give a real edict to USD and other global currency. So alternative to sanction will basically for us to get our own. There's a conversation going on East Africa common currency. There's a conversation going on about West Africa common currency. Okay, and there's conversation going on around BRICS, which some African countries like Uganda, South Africa, Nigeria is also being positioned to be members. So sanction, it means you need alternative. Instead of relying on global currency, for instance, you just have to find a way internally, whether as a country or as a continent or as regional blocks, to find an alternative. Then that is one. Then again, another thing that we should be looking at as a region or as a country, as a continent, is to be speaking to our diaspora. One of the critical and one of the most powerful strengths of Nigeria as a nation is the superflux and the global diaspora that country commands. Okay, the total number of people that live outside Nigeria that are Nigerians, it's almost like a country on its own in Africa. So with that mindset, even if anything is happening, okay, you could see voices of their diaspora speaking for them, doing a lot of collaboration, doing a lot of diplomatic conversation on behalf of their country. So what it means also in the space of sanction, okay, because some of the things that this sanction does basically is that you no longer have some foreign direct investments. Okay, you no longer have some deals that have been signed, and Western power begin to influence some of those deals. So, but if you have a robust diasporan, population, those guys, they know, irrespective of the alternative country they have, everybody has one country. Even if you have 5 passports of different countries, you have your original country. You can only have one country. Any other country is for economic purpose, basically. So your diaspora needs to come on board. Your diaspora needs to, be the savior. Your diaspora needs to, start investing back home. Okay, because the game basically is to stop FX, is to stop foreign direct investment as some of those sanctions. That's what it means. Okay, some investor will no longer come to your country. Some people will cancel the event. So it stops inflow of FX, stop inflow of business opportunities, sanctions stop inflow of even good PR that you've had in the past. So, but your diaspora, with the solid background that they have, they wouldn't just believe that they won't give up on your country, basically. So they need to continue in their own investment. They need to continue to, give the faith back home. They need to continue to, send money back home, send opportunity back home, train people, give people a lot of opportunity back home, basically. So sanctions will definitely affect us, but because the continent is not insulated in its own. It's a global village. What happened in America affects a tiny country in Mauritius. What affects what happened in the UK, what happened in Ukraine affect everybody. And those sanctions basically have economic impacts. Okay, inflows of forex will no longer come in, so we'll definitely have the opportunity through diaspora and the opportunity through local direct investments. So I think that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Jackie, are you there? I can't hear you. Can anyone hear Jackie? Say, can you hear Jackie?
No, I can't hear her, but